My name is Emily, and the night my world cracked open began with rain. Not the soft kind of rain that cools your skin. This was heavy, sharp, merciless rain that fell in sheets. It soaked through my blouse until the fabric clung to me like a second skin. Streetlights stretched across the wet pavement, like distorted mirrors blurring as the storm pressed harder. My heels slapped against the ground in quick, uneven steps. Every sound echoed like a reminder of where I had just come from. I had walked out of Tyler's mansion, alone. Inside that mansion, a dinner table longer than most banquet halls had become my battlefield. Across from me sat his parents, polished, wealthy, every word dripping with quiet disdain. They asked me questions, but not to know me. Each word was a measurement, each glance a reminder that in their world I did not belong. Where did I study? Why vocational school, not a university? Was tailoring even a real career? Did my family own property or just rent? I tried to answer politely. I forced a smile even as my stomach twisted tighter. But every answer seemed to make their eyes colder. And Tyler, my Tyler, just sat there, silent, unwilling to defend me. Not once did he say, "She is the woman I love. Respect her." He stared down at his plate, ashamed as if my existence embarrassed him. When I could no longer breathe under the weight of their judgment, I placed my napkin on the table, thanked them through trembling lips, and walked away. I had hoped foolishly that Tyler would follow, take my hand, prove me wrong. But when I glanced back, he was still there, still silent. That silence burned deeper than any insult his parents had thrown. So here I was, running through the storm, clutching my purse as if it could hold my dignity together. The water stung my eyes, though I could not tell where the rain ended and the tears began. I only knew I had to keep moving. The cold air sliced into me, but I hardly felt it. My mind kept replaying the evening like a cruel film. Hours earlier, I had stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down the peach blouse I had sewn myself. Tyler had smiled when he invited me. "It's time you meet them, Emily. You're important to me." Those words had looped in my head as I imagined a future, maybe even a proposal. I believed him. I believed us. But reality had stripped me bare in that dining room. And the truth hurt. I wasn't humiliated because I lacked money or prestige. I was humiliated because I had pinned my worth on someone who refused to stand by me. That realization cut deeper than the rain soaking my skin. I considered going home, but my mother would be there. Susan, my fragile, beautiful mother, with the heart condition that made stress dangerous. She always sensed my emotions the moment I walked through the door. If she saw me like this, drenched, broken, she would worry, and her heart could not take more worry. So I kept walking, letting the storm wash over me. When I passed the neon glow of a 24-hour coffee shop, I pushed inside. Warmth enveloped me instantly. The smell of roasted beans wrapped around me like a blanket. I shook the rain from my hair, blinking against the sudden brightness. My reflection in the window startled me. Mascara, smudged, blouse, clinging eyes, swollen. I looked like someone who had lost a war. I ordered a coffee, wrapped my hands around the steaming cup, and stared out at the rain. Cars blurred past. People rushed by under umbrellas. But the storm outside couldn't hide the storm inside me. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about Tyler. It wasn't just about one night, one dinner, one family's disapproval. It was about every time I told myself I wasn't enough because I didn't have a degree or a big house or a last name that opened doors. It was about every late night bent over my sewing machine, convincing myself my dream was too small to matter. It was about how I had believed love could finally erase those doubts, but love had stayed silent when I needed it most. I sipped the coffee slowly, letting its heat remind me that I was still here, that my story was not over. Maybe this was the brutal beginning of something new, something I had not yet imagined. The storm raged outside, but somewhere deep in my chest, a tiny spark refused to go out. And that was the night I began to see. The next morning the rain was gone, but the heaviness in my chest remained. Sunlight spilled through my curtains, soft and forgiving, but it could not erase the memory of last night. I lay in bed for a long while, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The table, the cold eyes of Tyler's mother, the questions that sliced like knives, and his silence. Always his silence. I should have felt anger. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside me and taken something I could never get back. My mind wanted to believe Tyler could still change. Maybe he would call, apologize, fight for me. But my heart whispered the truth I did not want to admit he had already chosen. And his choice was not me. I pulled myself up, wrapped in the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. My mother was already awake. Susan had a way of filling even our small apartment with warmth. She sat at the table with her morning tea, her cardigan draped around her shoulders, fragile yet steady. She looked up and smiled, but her eyes narrowed the moment she saw my face. "Emily," she said softly, "you didn't sleep." I forced a smile, trying to hide the storm inside. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." Her hand reached across the table, trembling slightly but full of love. "You don't have to be fine for me." Her words almost undid me. Tears threatened to spill, but I blinked them back. I could not break in front of her, not when she had already sacrificed so much just to keep me in this world. Instead, I sat with her, letting the silence between us do the talking. She didn't press for details. She never did. My mother knew that sometimes love meant waiting for the words to come when they were ready. After breakfast, I returned to my sewing machine. The old singer groaned as the pedal whirred beneath my foot. Its sound was imperfect, uneven, but familiar, like an old friend who never abandoned me. I pulled a spool of ivory thread and began stitching along a hemline. The motion soothed me each stitch, a reminder that I could still create something beautiful, even when my life felt broken. But the questions kept circling in my head. Was I truly not enough for Tyler's world, or had I simply chosen a man who lacked the courage to stand beside me? The truth terrified me, because if it was the latter, then everything I had believed about our relationship had been a lie. I paused, looking at the dress forming beneath my hands. It was meant for a young bride-to-be, a woman who would walk down the aisle believing love could conquer everything. I envied her faith. I envied her certainty. And yet a whisper inside me grew louder. Maybe last night was not proof of my inadequacy. Maybe it was proof of his. I closed my eyes and let that thought settle. For the first time since walking into that mansion, I felt the faintest flicker of power return. Still the loneliness crept in. The fear of what lay ahead without Tyler's promises, without the safety net I thought he would offer. My future stretched out before me like a fogged road, uncertain, unpredictable. But then I remembered the coffee shop, the warmth of that cup in my hands, the realization that I had been measuring myself by standards that were never mine to begin with. Maybe this pain was the start of something greater. Maybe it was the universe forcing me to stop living in someone else's shadow. I looked at the machine again, at the fabric beneath my fingers, at the life I had built with my own 2 hands. Perhaps that was worth more than all the money in Tyler's family. I whispered to myself, this isn't the end, it's the beginning. And as I said it, I believed it a little more. Before I continue, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever faced a moment when someone's silence hurt you more than their words? If you have, you'll understand why I'm sharing this so openly. If you're listening right now and you believe these stories matter, take a second to subscribe and share where you're watching from. Your support keeps me going, and it helps others find the courage to face their own storms. That morning I realized Tyler's rejection did not have to define me. It could refine me. The story was still being written, and for once I was holding the pen. The following days felt like walking through fog. I went to work at the alteration shop, measured hems, pinned seams, and smiled at customers. On the surface, everything looked normal, but inside, every thought circled back to the same truth Tyler had shown me who he really was, and I had finally started to see who I was. One evening after a long shift, I returned to that same 24-hour coffee shop, the place where I had hidden from the storm. I sat by the window, a mug warming my hands, and stared at the world outside. Cars rolled past, their headlights glowing on wet pavement. Strangers hurried along the sidewalks, each with their own story. For once, I wondered if any of them carried a heartbreak like mine. As the minutes ticked by, my mind replayed moments I had buried for years. The way people had looked at me in high school when I said I wanted to be a seamstress. Their smirks, their dismissive laughs. Why not something bigger? Why not something that matters? The way I had compared myself to classmates with wealthy parents, kids who didn't have to work nights just to keep the lights on. I thought back to late evenings at my sewing machine, creating dresses out of scraps while other girls went to parties. I had told myself I was chasing too small a dream, that I wasn't enough. And Tyler's family sitting in their mansion with eyes sharp as glass had only confirmed the fears I'd carried for years. But here's what hit me that night in the coffee shop. Maybe the problem was not that my dream was too small. Maybe the problem was that I had let other people measure it for me. I looked down at my hands. They were rougher than most women my age. Calloused from needles, scarred by scissors, yet steady and strong. These hands had created beauty when the world dismissed me. These hands had kept me going when there was no one else to lean on. I thought about my mother, how she would come home exhausted from work, but still ask me about my dreams. How she had bought fabric we could barely afford because she believed in me. How she once told me, "Emily, your hands are gentle. They will make something beautiful out of this world." Tears filled my eyes. For so long I had believed other voices more than hers. I had let doubt win. But not tonight. I sat there gripping my cup and made a quiet promise to myself I would not let their judgment break me. I would not shrink anymore. The truth is, pain can blur your vision. It convinces you that you are small, powerless. But sometimes pain sharpens what matters most. And sitting in that coffee shop, surrounded by strangers, I realized I had to stop living for Tyler's approval, or anyone's approval. I had to start living for me. The rain outside tapped against the glass, softer now, like an echo of the storm that had carried me here. And for the first time, I did not feel ashamed of where I came from. My rented apartment, my vocational degree, my sewing machine that squeaked with every press of the pedal. These were not symbols of failure. They were proof of survival. I whispered to myself, this is not the end. This is where I begin again. And I meant it. Why? I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle inside me like a seed planted deep in the soil. One day I promised it would grow into something strong. But the path forward was still hidden. I didn't yet know how I would rebuild. I didn't yet know what challenges were waiting just around the corner. All I knew was that I could no longer run from who I was. I had to face it, embrace it, and fight for it. 'Cause no one else was going to do it for me. And that realization, sharp, painful, liberating, was the first step toward everything that would come next. That night as I walked home, the air was crisp. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean. I tilted my face upward, letting the cool breeze brush against my skin. For the first time in days, I felt lighter, not healed, but no longer broken. Something inside me had shifted, and even though I didn't know it yet, this quiet turning point was about to collide with a storm much greater than heartbreak. When I think back to my childhood, the picture that always rises first is of my mother Susan, sitting at the small kitchen table in our rented apartment. The light from the single bulb above would cast a soft glow on her tired face, yet she always managed to smile at me. It was just the two of us. No brothers, no sisters, no father waiting at the door. My dad had left before I was old enough to remember his face, and Mom never poisoned me with bitterness. She only said some people aren't ready to love the way a family needs. That was enough explanation for me. Our apartment was modest, tucked on the edge of Des Moines. 2 bedrooms, thin walls furniture that looked older than both of us combined. But my mother filled every inch with warmth. She worked as an administrative assistant at a small insurance office, juggling endless paperwork and phone calls. Even when exhaustion pulled at her shoulders, she came home asking Emily, "What did you dream about today?" She carried a heart condition, one I didn't fully understand as a child. I just knew there were times she grew breathless, climbing stairs, or had to sit down suddenly when her chest tightened. Doctors had once told her that pregnancy was too risky, that her heart couldn't handle it. But she chose me anyway. She told me later, "I wanted you, Emily. You were my dream before you were even born. That kind of love marked me forever. It also made me independent. While other kids played until dusk, I learned to cook simple meals, wash dishes, fold laundry. It wasn't duty, it was survival, and it felt natural to give back to the woman who gave me everything. But the greatest gift she gave me was creativity. I remember the day she pulled out her old Singer sewing machine. The thing was stubborn, squeaking with every press of the pedal, but to me, it was magic. I sat with feet barely reaching the floor, running crooked seams across scraps of fabric, while Mom clapped like I had just designed for a runway in New York. She'd lean close and whisper, "Your hands are gentle, Emily. Gentle hands create beauty." Those words sank deep. By high school, while others talked about scholarships or sports, I dreamed of designing clothes. Not flashy lines for glossy magazines, but dresses that made real women feel beautiful. We couldn't afford a prestigious fashion school. I didn't have the grades or the money. But I found a vocational program after graduation, and I enrolled without hesitation. People looked at me strangely when I said I wanted to be a seamstress, as if it wasn't ambitious enough, as if I had already limited my life. But Mom's eyes lit up every time she saw me work, and that was all the validation I needed. There were Christmases when gifts were handmade because there wasn't money for anything else. Birthdays with spaghetti and bread instead of steak. Summers when we painted kitchen cabinets ourselves because hiring anyone was impossible. We laughed, though. We turned our tiny living room into a runway the day I finished my first real dress. But at night, I sometimes heard Mom crying in her room, thinking I couldn't hear. She worried about the future, about her heart, about what would happen to me if she couldn't be there. Those quiet sobs etched into me a promise I would find a way to make life better for us. That promise became my fuel. I worked double shifts at the shop, saving every spare dollar, cutting corners, building towards something larger. I rarely went out, rarely dated. My dream was clear, create stability for us, one stitch at a time. And yet when Tyler walked into my life, he felt like a reward for all those sacrifices. He looked at me differently, or at least I thought he did. He made me feel seen, as if all the hours behind the sewing machine had shaped someone worthy of love. That's why last night had cut so deep. His silence at that dinner table wasn't just about his parents. It was about everything. It was about the girl who had grown up believing she wasn't enough, fighting every day to prove otherwise, and finally watching the man she trusted confirm her worst fear. Still remembering, my mother steadied me. She had faced harder storms and kept smiling. She had chosen love when it might have cost her life. She had believed in me when no one else did. If she could be that strong, then so could I. I sat back from my sewing machine and let the hum fade. My reflection in the window caught my eye, pale, tired, but still standing, still fighting. And I whispered the same promise I had made as a child: I will make this better for her and for me. That vow, I didn't know it then, was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The old Singer machine rattled beneath my fingers, its uneven hum filling the quiet apartment. Threads pulled, fabric folded, and slowly a dress began to take shape. I thought back to when I was 9, sitting on a stool with my feet dangling, learning to push the pedal with all my weight. My lines were crooked back then, but Mom had clapped like I had created magic. That memory stayed with me through every difficult night. I had never dreamed of luxury. I didn't want to build an empire. What I wanted was simple, an intimate bridal studio where women walked in feeling ordinary and left feeling radiant. I wanted to give them the same spark my mother gave me. For years, that dream kept me working late nights, pricking my fingers, and taking extra shifts just to afford fabric. But sometimes I wondered if I had aimed too small. Friends from school were chasing degrees and jobs with titles I could barely pronounce. They looked at me as if I was settling, as if sewing was something you did on weekends, not a calling. Those voices lived inside my head, and I hated how often they drowned out my own. Last night at Tyler's family mansion had magnified that doubt. His mother's eyes had sliced right through me, confirming the suspicion I carried that I would never be enough for their world. And Tyler's silence had carved the wound deeper. Still, here I was, pressing seams, sewing stitches, reminding myself that what I created mattered. Every dress was a story, every alteration a lifeline for a woman who wanted to shine on her most important day. I paused, leaning back in my chair. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened window. Shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red, but hands steady. I thought of my mother's words again. Your hands are gentle. Gentle hands create beauty. Maybe beauty itself was the answer. Not prestige, not wealth, not approval. Just beauty, real and tangible, crafted by hands that refused to quit. And then a thought broke through my haze. Why did I let strangers define whether my dream was enough? Why did I hand over that power so easily? The truth was clear, they didn't live my life, and they never would. I whispered to myself, this is my story, I get to write it. Still a question lingered. Could I really keep fighting? Could I hold on when the weight of rejection pressed so hard? That question wasn't just mine. It's a question we all face at some point, isn't it? If you've ever been told your dream was too small or that you weren't enough, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments because sometimes sharing our battles is the first step to winning them. And if you're still listening, make sure to follow along because we're just getting started. I folded the dress carefully and set it aside. My back ached, but my spirit felt sharper than it had in days. Every stitch reminded me that I was not powerless. My life might not look impressive at a glance, but it was mine, built thread by thread, sacrifice by sacrifice. I thought about the women I had already dressed for their weddings, their smiles when they twirled in front of the mirror, the tears of mothers seeing daughters transformed. Those moments mattered. Maybe they mattered more than impressing people who judged worth by bank accounts and pedigrees. For the first time since that stormy night, I felt a spark of pride. Of course, pride did not erase reality. Bills still piled on the counter. My mother's heart condition still lingered in the background. And I still carried the bruise of Tyler's betrayal. But tonight, none of that silenced the small, steady flame that refused to go out. I pressed my palm flat on the fabric, breathing in the quiet. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know what battles still waited for me. But I knew one thing. My dream, however small others thought it was, still lived inside me. And no one, not even Tyler's powerful family, could take that away. I turned off the machine, the apartment falling into silence. My mother stirred softly in her room, and I smiled. Tomorrow would come with its challenges, but tonight I had reclaimed something precious. My belief in myself? I carried that into sleep, unaware that soon my life would collide with a storm far greater than heartbreak or judgment. The first time I met Tyler feels almost like another lifetime. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air smelled faintly of leaves and wood smoke. My best friend Lily had begged me to go to a small fundraising dance. I resisted at first. I was tired, fresh off a double shift at the alteration shop, and I didn't feel like I belonged at fancy events. But she insisted, so I pulled out a simple navy dress I had made myself months earlier. The venue glowed under string lights wrapped around pillars. Jazz floated through the air, mingling with the soft clink of glasses. Men and women moved confidently in suits and gowns that cost more than my monthly rent. I felt out of place the moment I walked through the door, clutching a flimsy plastic cup of punch like it was a shield. And then he appeared. Tyler had that kind of smile that felt easy, disarming. His dark hair was neatly styled, his suit tailored to perfection. He looked like someone who had grown up in this world of chandeliers and charity galas. Yet he walked over with a warmth that surprised me. "Is this your first time at one of these?" he asked, leaning just enough so I could hear him over the music. "Yes," I admitted nervously. "Is it that obvious?" He grinned. "It's not a bad thing. Sometimes the people who don't belong at these things are the most interesting ones here." I laughed, startled by the connection, and in that moment something sparked. We talked for hours that night, about my work, his studies at business school, our favorite restaurants in the city. When I mentioned I was a seamstress, he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in and said, "You actually make clothes? That's incredible. I can barely sew a button back on." That night was the beginning. He called the very next day, then coffee, then dinner, then movies. Tyler had an energy about him like life was a game he already knew how to win. He drove a sleek car, wore watches that could have paid my rent for months, but he laughed at my thrift store jokes. He ate my home-cooked meals like they were five-star dishes. He told me more than once, "You're the hardest working person I know." I let myself believe he saw me, really saw me, and for months I clung to that belief. Looking back now, I realize there were signs I ignored. He never invited me to family gatherings. When I asked, he brushed it off with, "They're private. You'll meet them eventually." And I held on to that word eventually like it was a promise. Still, there were moments when his affection felt genuine. He would stop by the shop late at night, coffee in hand, just to watch me sew. He talked about road trips, maybe New York for the holidays. He painted pictures of a future I wanted so badly to believe in. That is why the dinner at his family mansion had cut me so deeply. For almost a year, I thought I had finally found someone who valued me, not for my bank account, not for a degree I didn't have, but for me. And then in a single night, all of that collapsed. Now, as I replayed that first evening in my head, the memory felt tainted. His smile, once a symbol of possibility, now looked more like a mask. His warmth, once comforting, felt calculated. Had he ever truly seen me? Or had I been a convenient chapter in a life he wanted to decorate with novelty? The questions gnawed at me, but I couldn't answer them. What I could see clearly, however, was this Tyler had been the one person I thought would defend me when the world turned cruel, and he didn't. That truth was heavy. It pressed against my ribs and made every breath feel shallow. Yet it also cleared the fog. It forced me to confront reality without illusions. Maybe Tyler had been the beginning of my story, but he would not be the end. The night we met had felt like fate, but perhaps it was only a stepping stone. A reminder that not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Some are there to test your strength, to show you what you truly deserve. And Tyler, without meaning to, had done exactly that. For nearly a year, I convinced myself that Tyler was serious about me. I ignored the hesitations, the subtle ways he kept me outside his family's orbit. Every time I asked about introducing me, he brushed it off with the same line. "They're private, Emily. You'll meet them eventually." That word eventually kept me holding on like a lifeline. When he finally invited me, my heart nearly burst with hope. I told myself it was proof that he saw a future with me, that I wasn't just another fleeting chapter in his privileged life. My mother, Susan, beamed when I shared the news. Her eyes glistened as she cupped my cheek and whispered, "See, good things happen to good people." I didn't tell her how terrified I was or how heavy the knot in my stomach felt. I just wanted to believe. The day arrived with steady drizzle. I wore a soft blue dress I had sewn from discounted fabric, a design simple but elegant. Paired with modest heels, it was the best I could offer. Tyler had been tied up at work, so I took the bus across town. I remember pressing my forehead against the window, watching raindrops streak across the glass as I rehearsed polite answers in my head. Halfway there, something happened that would stay with me forever. At the front of the bus, a frail woman in a tan coat argued with the driver. Her voice shook as she pleaded, "I just need to get to the hospital. My grandson's there. Please, I'll pay you back tomorrow." The driver shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, I can't let you ride without fare." People averted their eyes, sinking into seats, pretending not to hear. But I couldn't. There was something in her posture, a desperate dignity clinging to pride even as her world cracked. My chest tightened. Without thinking, I stood, walked forward, and handed the driver enough for 2 fares. The woman turned to me startled. "Oh no, sweetheart, I can't." "It's fine," I said gently. "Please just sit." "Which hospital?" Her eyes softened with relief. "Mercy General. My grandson had an accident. They say he'll be okay, but I need to be there." "Then you shouldn't be standing here," I told her. She clasped my hand with trembling fingers. "Thank you. My name is Jeanette Miller, and you are—" Emily Cooper." She smiled faintly. "Emily, you've got a kind heart. The world doesn't see enough of that anymore." She sat across from me, clutching her worn bag, and we rode in silence while rain tapped the windows. 3 stops later, she rose, waving goodbye. "I'll remember this, sweetheart," she said. I smiled, thinking it was just something people said. At the time, I had no idea how much that moment would matter. By the time I reached Tyler's family estate, the drizzle had turned into a full downpour. The mansion loomed like a palace, columns, landscaped gardens, even a fountain that glittered under rain. My chest tightened as I stepped through the gates. Inside, marble floors and chandeliers reflected wealth I had only seen in magazines. I smoothed my skirt and told myself to hold my head high. This was just dinner. I could do this. But deep down, a voice whispered otherwise. I didn't know it yet, but I was walking into the most brutal test of my life, one that would strip me bare, not just in front of strangers, but in front of the man I thought loved me. And everything that happened on that rainy bus ride was about to come full circle in ways I never could have imagined. Before I tell you what happened inside that mansion, I want you to think about something. Have you ever ignored a warning sign because you were so desperate to believe in someone? That moment when your heart says wait, but you rush ahead anyway. If you know that feeling, stay with me because what came next changed my life forever. And it might change how you see your own. I took a deep breath as the butler opened the door, unaware that my world was about to unravel at a single dinner table. The butler's presence alone unsettled me. I didn't know people still had butlers outside of movies, yet here he was, polished in black and white, ushering me into a foyer so vast it could have swallowed our entire apartment twice over. A chandelier dripped with crystal above my head, and a sweeping staircase curled like a ribbon. I forced myself to breathe. Then Tyler appeared descending the stairs with his familiar, easy smile. For a heartbeat, I relaxed. "You made it," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. I wanted to believe that smile meant safety, that I had overthought everything. Maybe tonight really was a step forward. He led me into the dining room. My breath caught the second I saw it. The table stretched endlessly, dressed in silver and china, though only 4 seats were filled. His father rose slightly, tall, broad-shouldered, his handshake firm but cold, as if greeting a stranger he would never see again. His mother sat in pearls that probably cost more than my car, her cream blouse flawless, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Natalie, is it?" she asked. Her voice carried a lilt that pretended politeness, but her eyes betrayed calculation. "Emily," I corrected gently, sitting where Tyler gestured. My dress clung damply from the rain, and I smoothed the fabric under the table, wishing for invisibility. Dinner began with small talk, weather charity galas, investment ventures. I tried to join in, offering polite comments, but every time I spoke, silence followed. Quick glances darted between them, silent verdicts passed without words. I shrank smaller with each pause, and then the question started. "So Emily," his mother said, her fork clinking softly against porcelain. "You're a seamstress." "Yes," I replied, injecting false cheer into my voice. "I design and alter bridal and formal wear. I'm hoping to expand into custom gowns soon." Her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. And where did you study for that?" "I attended vocational college in Des Moines." "Ah, not a 4-year university." The words were disguised as observation, but landed like a wound. I felt my cheeks heat. "No, ma'am. I wanted to begin working as soon as possible to help my mother." "Helping your mother?" his father interjected, tone sharp with curiosity. "Is she unwell?" I hesitated, then answered carefully. "She has a heart condition. I live with her so I can be there when she needs me." His mother's eyes flicked toward Tyler, then back to me. Her voice was flat. "How admirable." The air grew heavier with each bite of food. More questions followed. Did we rent or own our apartment? How many clients did I have? Had I considered another career, something with more stability? Their words were daggers disguised as courtesy. And through it all, Tyler remained silent. He nodded at his father's remarks, chuckled at a joke I didn't catch, and avoided my gaze entirely. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach across the table, shake him, and demand he defend me. Just one sentence. One sign that I wasn't alone at this table, but he never gave it. By the time dessert arrived, my appetite was gone. I folded my napkin with trembling hands, whispered, "Thank you so much for dinner. I'm afraid I need to leave. I have an early morning at work." His mother's expression didn't shift. "Of course, it was enlightening to meet you." Enlightening, the word burned. I stood clutching my purse like armor. For one fragile second, I lingered, hoping Tyler would rise, follow me, ask if I was okay. But he didn't. He leaned toward his father instead, murmuring something low. So I walked out alone. The rain outside had grown harsher, pelting me as I stepped into the night. Each drop mingled with the tears I could no longer hide. My heels struck the pavement in rapid beats, drowning out the echo of humiliation. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a bad dinner. It was the end of something I had once believed in. And maybe painfully, it was the beginning of something else. Like, by the time I reached home, I lingered at the door, forcing a smile onto my face. My mother called from her bedroom, voice soft with fatigue. "Emily, is that you?" "Yes, Mom," I answered, kicking off soaked heels. "Just tired, that's all." I rushed to the shower before she could see me. Under the hot spray, I finally let go, tears streaming freely as the memory of Tyler's silence burned deeper than any words his parents had spoken. That night I cried until the water turned cold. And even then, I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The days after that dinner blurred together in shades of gray. I went to the shop, stitched seams, measured hems, and forced polite smiles for brides-to-be. But inside, I felt hollow. Tyler hadn't called. Not to check on me, not to apologize, not even to offer an explanation. His silence was its own verdict. At night I lay awake listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and my mother's gentle breathing in the next room. I clung to those sounds like lifelines, reminders that I still had something to fight for. Yet every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dining room again, the polished silver, the sharp smiles, and Tyler looking down at his plate while I drowned in humiliation. I thought I had reached the lowest point, but life, it seemed, wasn't finished testing me. One morning I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table, pale and gripping her chest. My heart dropped. I rushed to her side, but she waved me off weakly. "Just a little dizzy, Emily. It happens." Her eyes told me otherwise. Fear flickered there, the kind she tried to hide. That afternoon we sat in the cold office of a cardiologist. Tests, murmurs, notes scribbled on a chart. Then the specialist looked at me with eyes that didn't soften his words. "Your mother's condition has worsened significantly. Medication is no longer enough. She needs surgery, and soon." The word surgery hollowed me out. How soon, I asked, my voice a whisper. "Within the next month, ideally within weeks. Without it, her risk of heart failure rises sharply." My palms went cold, and the cost. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. For someone uninsured at this level, we are looking at $80,000 to $100,000. The air left my lungs. That number might as well have been a mountain. It was more than I could make in 3 years, maybe longer. I forced myself to ask about assistance programs. He gave me a list of foundations, but his voice was careful, almost apologetic. Most programs targeted children or specific demographics. He told me to try, but to be prepared for rejection. That night I sat at our tiny kitchen table long after Mom had gone to bed, the list of numbers spread before me. I called everyone. Some were polite but firm, others didn't return my calls. One woman sighed and said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. If you had young kids at home, or if it was a tragic accident, maybe donors would respond. But this..." She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. My mother's life was hanging in the balance, and no one wanted to help. Finally, desperation drove me to do something I swore I wouldn't. I called Tyler. He answered on the second ring, his tone surprised. "Emily, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." I swallowed hard. "Tyler, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious. My mom needs heart surgery. We don't have the money. I thought maybe you could just a loan until I figure something out. I'll pay you back every cent." Silence, then a quiet laugh. "Emily, really? My mom literally warned me this would happen. She said if we broke up, you'd probably find some excuse to..." "Tyler, stop," I cut in, my voice breaking. "This isn't about me. This is about my mother's life." "Yeah, well, I'm sorry she's sick, but I'm not a bank. Don't call me again." Click! The line went dead. I stared at my phone, his last words echoing like a curse. "Don't call me again." For the first time in years, I felt truly powerless. Two impossible choices spread before me: watch my mother fade away or find a miracle. And miracles, at least in my experience, never came on demand. Have you ever faced that kind of wall where every path forward looks impossible? If you've been there, if you've had to beg, plead, or fight for someone you love, share it in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone. Because in that moment, I had never felt lonelier in my life. But sometimes kindness circles back when you least expect it. And just when I was convinced there was no way out, a face from a rainy bus ride would reappear and everything would change. 2 days after Tyler's cruel dismissal, I found myself sitting on a bench outside Mercy General Hospital. My mother was inside undergoing pre-op testing. Though the truth was simple, we still had no way to pay for the surgery. My head bowed, my hands covered my face, and for a moment I let despair consume me. The pavement beneath my feet was cracked, the sky above a dull gray. I felt as though the world had shrunk, pressing in on me from every side. For so long I had fought to keep things together, to protect my mother, to prove myself. But in that moment, I was just a daughter on the verge of losing the only person who had ever truly believed in me. Then I heard it, a voice gentle, warm, and familiar. "Sweetheart, is that you, Emily?" I lifted my head, blinking through tears, and froze. Standing before me was the elderly woman from the bus, Jeanette Miller. She wore the same tan coat, her knitted hat slightly askew, her eyes filled with the same quiet kindness I remembered. "Mrs. Miller," my voice cracked. She smiled and reached for my hands. "I told you I'd remember you. But you look like I did the day I lost my husband. Are you all right?" Shame burned through me. "It's just been a hard week. My mom, she needs heart surgery, but we don't have the money. I don't know what to do." Her gaze softened and she sat beside me on the bench. "You gave me dignity the day I had none. You reached out when no one else would. Don't tell me it wasn't a big deal. It was everything." Before I could respond, she waved to someone across the parking lot. "Benjamin, over here." A tall man approached, late 20s, with kind eyes and a steady presence that radiated strength. He carried himself like someone who had walked through storms and survived. "Grandma, who's this?" he asked, smiling gently. "This," she said proudly, "is the young woman I told you about, the one who helped me get to the hospital to see you." His expression shifted with recognition. "That was you, thank you. If you hadn't stepped in, my grandmother would have missed being there when I woke up after the accident." My throat tightened. It was nothing, really. "No," Jeanette said firmly, "it was everything. And now Emily needs help." Benjamin sat on my other side, his voice calm without judgment. "Tell me what's going on." And so I did. I told him everything: my mother's worsening condition, the looming cost, the foundations that turned me away, and even Tyler's cold rejection. My words cracked, but once I started, I couldn't stop. When I finally finished, silence settled around us. Benjamin didn't hesitate. "How much do you need?" I blinked, stunned. "What? No, I can't ask you for money." "I know you're not asking," he said gently. "I'm offering. My company is doing well, and honestly, this is the least I can do. You helped my grandmother when you didn't have to. Now let me help you." Tears blurred my vision. "It's too much. I can't accept." "You can," he said steadily, "and you will. Because this isn't charity. It's an investment in someone who deserves it. Your mom deserves a chance to live without you drowning in debt." Jeanette placed her hand over mine. "You gave me a gift that day on the bus. Now let us give you one back." For the first time in weeks, hope flickered inside me, real, steady, impossible to ignore. Benjamin pulled out his phone. "I'll call the billing department. We'll get this cleared. And once your mom is stable, I want to hear more about your dream. You said you design bridal gowns. Maybe there's a future we can build for you, too." I stared at him, breathless. Why would you do this for me?" His expression softened. "Because kindness deserves to be paid forward. And because you remind me of my grandmother, quiet strength even when life is unfair. People like you are rare, Mike." For the first time in weeks, I felt light break through the darkness. And though I didn't know it yet, this moment born from one small act of kindness on a rainy bus ride would transform not just my mother's life, but mine as well. The very next morning, I woke to a phone call that felt unreal. The hospital's billing department confirmed that the full amount for my mother's surgery had been arranged. Every cent. They told me we no longer had to worry about payment, that the procedure could move forward without delay. I sat there holding the phone, whispering "thank you" over and over until my voice broke. When I told my mother, her eyes filled with tears. She pressed her fragile hand to mine, her voice trembling. "Emily, angels walk this earth. You met one when you helped that woman on the bus, and now they've come back for us." I wanted to believe her, but even as gratitude swelled in my chest, fear still gnawed at me. Surgery was surgery. Risk hovered over every word the doctors used. What if I lost her anyway? What if kindness had come too late? The days leading up to the procedure blurred into frantic appointments, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Benjamin and Jeanette didn't vanish after their offer, they stayed. Benjamin checked in constantly, bringing coffee when he knew I'd skipped meals, asking how my mother was holding up. His presence steadied me in ways I hadn't expected. On the morning of the surgery, the hospital corridors felt like endless tunnels. The smell of antiseptic, the distant beeping of machines, the shuffle of nurses' shoes, all of it pressed against me. My mother gripped my hand as they wheeled her toward the operating room. "Emily," she whispered, her voice both fragile and fierce. "Don't let this scare you. Life has a way of turning pain into something beautiful. You just have to let it." I tried to smile, though tears blurred my vision. "I'm not scared, Mom. Not anymore." But I was terrified. As the doors swung shut, I felt the weight of helplessness crash over me. 6 hours. That's how long they said the surgery could take. 6 hours of pacing, waiting, wondering if I'd walk out of that hospital with my world intact or shattered. Benjamin and Jeanette stayed with me the entire time. They told me stories to distract me, childhood mishaps, funny accidents, even the first time Benjamin tried to cook and nearly set the kitchen on fire. I found myself laughing despite the fear. It felt strange, almost guilty to laugh on a day like this. But maybe that's what I needed. Minutes dragged into hours. Every time the door swung open, my heart leapt only to crash when it wasn't the surgeon. My hands shook so badly that I nearly spilled my coffee more than once. I kept checking my phone as though answers might appear there instead of behind closed doors. Finally, the surgeon emerged, his face tired but smiling. "It went perfectly. She's stable. With proper recovery, her prognosis is excellent." Relief crashed over me like a wave so strong it stole my breath. My knees gave out and I sank into a chair sobbing. But these tears weren't of fear. They were gratitude. I hugged Benjamin and Jeanette without hesitation, clinging to them as though they were family. In a way, they had become just that. Strangers who had stepped in when I had nothing left, who carried me through the darkest storm I had ever faced. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe in tomorrow. The next few weeks were consumed with recovery. My mother's color slowly returned, her laugh grew stronger. Each milestone felt like a miracle: the first time she sat up without help, the first time she walked down the hall. With every step she took, the fear inside me loosened its grip. Benjamin didn't fade away either. He kept showing up, flowers in hand, for Mom, coffee for me, encouragement spilling from every word. He asked about my dream, the studio I had whispered about, the one I had convinced myself was impossible. He spoke about investors, about making it real. I listened, but part of me hesitated. Could I accept more? Could I really believe I was worthy of that kind of future? Yet every time I looked at my mother, stronger and brighter, I knew this kindness had already saved her life. Maybe it could save my dream too. The months that followed felt like breathing after being underwater too long. My mother regained strength slowly but surely. Her cheeks carried more color. Her laughter returned like music I thought I might never hear again. Watching her recovery was like watching a miracle unfold in slow motion. Every day she got stronger, and every day I thanked the universe for the kindness of strangers who had stepped in when I had nothing left. Benjamin became part of our daily rhythm. He dropped by, often carrying flowers for Mom and coffee for me. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes takeout dinners when he knew I was too tired to cook. But more than the gifts, it was his presence that mattered. He didn't treat us like charity cases. He treated us like people worth showing up for. One afternoon when Mom was resting, Benjamin sat at our tiny kitchen table, spreading out papers. "Emily," he said, his tone serious but warm, "I wasn't kidding about investing in your dream. I've seen your work. You don't just sew, you create experiences. Brides remember those moments forever. You deserve a studio of your own." I shook my head instinctively. "Ben, you've already done too much. You saved my mother's life. I can't let you." He smiled gently, cutting me off. "You call saving a life too much? This is nothing. This isn't about charity. It's about potential, and I believe in yours." His words landed deeper than he probably knew. For so long, I had begged for validation from people like Tyler, people who measured worth in money and connections. Now here was someone who saw me for my craft, my persistence, my quiet strength. But even as hope bloomed, fear whispered, what if I failed? What if I proved everyone right, that my dream was too small, too fragile? I looked down at my hands. They still bore faint scars from years of needles and scissors. Yet those same hands had carried me through every hardship. Maybe they could carry me further still. I didn't give him an answer that day. Instead, I let the idea settle like fabric waiting to be cut. But deep inside, I already knew I wanted to say yes. And yet something told me this was only the beginning of a bigger shift. Because dreams, especially fragile ones, never grow without trials. Life had already shown me that storms could come without warning. And though the skies above me seemed clear for the first time in months, I had a feeling more challenges waited just around the corner. Before I tell you how my dream finally took shape, I want you to stop and imagine something. Have you ever stood at the edge of a decision that could change your life forever? That moment where fear and hope collide, where you know one step forward could transform everything. That's exactly where I stood, and what came next was bigger than anything I had dared to believe. Stay with me, because the twist in my story was just about to unfold. I folded Benjamin's papers carefully and tucked them back into his folder. I'll think about it, I whispered. He nodded, patient, confident, that time would bring me to the answer he already knew I carried inside. And as I looked across the table at him, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel terrifying. It felt wide open. 9 months after my mother's surgery, the ribbon was cut on Cooper Bridal. It hadn't been easy. There were permits, renovations, endless paperwork, and moments when I thought the whole plan might collapse. But Benjamin never let me give up. He was there for every step, connecting me with investors who believed in small businesses, reminding me that the dream I had nurtured since childhood deserved to stand on its own. The day of the opening, sunlight streamed through the front windows of our little downtown studio. The air smelled of fresh paint and fabric, a mix of new beginnings. A small crowd gathered, friends, a few early clients, even Jeanette, who clapped proudly from the front row. My mother stood beside me, holding a bouquet Benjamin had brought. Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered, "You did it, Emily. You made it real." When I cut that ribbon, cheers echoed in the narrow space, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I had always craved: belonging. Not the belonging Tyler's family had denied me, but the kind you build yourself stitch by stitch until it becomes undeniable. The weeks that followed were a blur. Brides came in with nervous smiles, unsure if they could feel beautiful. I poured every ounce of myself into their gowns, customizing, altering, creating. One young woman, shy and quiet, broke down in tears the moment she tried on her finished dress. "I feel beautiful again," she whispered. Her words echoed in my chest long after she left, because they reminded me of my own journey, how I had felt broken and invisible only to find light again through kindness and perseverance. Benjamin kept his promise too. He didn't fade into the background after the investment. He visited often, sometimes with his grandmother, sometimes alone. He asked about my progress, celebrated small victories, and listened when I confessed my fears. Our bond deepened, not rushed, but steady, rooted in trust, rather than fleeting passion. Every evening when I closed the shop, I walked home with a fullness in my heart I had never known before. This was what I had dreamed of all along: creating beauty, building a life that was mine, and watching my mother laugh freely again. But there were still moments when shadows from the past slipped in. Sometimes late at night, Tyler's face would flash through my mind, not with anger anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. If he hadn't failed me, I might never have found the path that led here. I realized then that heartbreak is not always destruction. Sometimes it's redirection. Standing in my studio one quiet afternoon, sunlight pooling across bolts of satin, I let that truth sink in. The girl who once cried in the rain outside a mansion was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived betrayal, faced despair, and built something no one could take away. And this was only the beginning. Have you ever had a dream that others dismissed as too small only to prove them wrong? If you have, you know the fire it lights inside you. Share it, because those stories inspire more than you realize. And if you're listening, don't stop here. The next part of my journey holds a truth I never expected, a twist that changed how I saw everything. What? That night, as I locked up Cooper Bridal and watched my mother and Jeanette laughing together inside, I felt it again, that quiet certainty that storms don't just break us. They clear the skies for something greater, and I was finally ready to step into that light. The months after the opening of Cooper Bridal felt like a season of rebirth. My mother grew stronger every day, her laughter returning to the rhythm of our home. The studio began to blossom as word spread. Brides recommended me to their friends, and each gown carried a story woven not only with thread, but with resilience and hope. One memory still lingers as if it happened yesterday. A young bride-to-be entered the shop one rainy afternoon. She was shy, almost apologetic, as though afraid to take up space. Her voice trembled when she said, "Nothing looks good on me. I just don't feel beautiful anymore." Her shoulders slumped beneath invisible weight. I recognized that look. It was the same one I had carried after Tyler's betrayal, the look of someone convinced they weren't enough. I worked with her for weeks, sketching, fitting, adjusting, until her reflection in the mirror transformed. When she finally tried on the completed gown, her eyes filled with tears. She turned, staring at herself as though meeting someone new. "I feel beautiful again," she whispered. Her words pierced me. They echoed everything I had once lost and slowly rebuilt. Helping her reclaim her confidence reminded me of how far I had come. Benjamin was there through it all. He stopped by the studio, often bringing lunch or flowers for my mother. Sometimes we stayed late after closing, sipping coffee, while I showed him sketches of future designs. Our connection deepened quietly, like roots spreading beneath the surface. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just steady trust built from shared storms. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Benjamin leaned against the counter, watching me pin fabric to a mannequin. "You know, Emily," he said, "you don't just make dresses. You give people back pieces of themselves they thought were gone." His words lingered long after he left. I realized he was right, not only about my clients, but about myself. Sewing had always been more than fabric and thread. It had been my survival, my rebellion, my proof that beauty could grow even in small apartments and stormy nights. My mother often reminded me how close we had come to losing everything. "Emily," she said one night, her voice soft, "don't ever forget this second chance. It's proof that kindness still matters in this world." She looked toward Benjamin, who was laughing with Jeanette in the living room. "And sometimes family isn't the people you're born to, it's the ones who show up when everything falls apart." Those words rooted in me. Family had always felt like a fragile concept. My father had walked away before I could remember his face. Tyler had abandoned me when I needed him most. But now, surrounded by my mother, Jeanette, and Benjamin, I realized I was no longer alone. Still shadows from the past had a way of returning. One night while closing the shop, I caught myself thinking of Tyler, not with bitterness, but with clarity. If he had defended me at that table, if his parents had welcomed me, I might have slipped quietly into their world. I might have built a life, measured by someone else's approval. But he hadn't, and because of that, I had been forced onto a path that was mine alone. Sometimes heartbreak isn't a tragedy, it's a turning point. As I flipped the closed sign on the studio door, I gazed at the quiet street, the glow of lamplight reflecting on wet pavement. For the first time in years, I felt not just like I was surviving, but thriving. My dream was real. My mother was alive and well. I had a circle of people who valued me not for what I lacked, but for who I was. And it had all started with one simple act of kindness on a rainy bus ride. Looking back now, it amazes me how a single moment can redirect the course of an entire life. One rainy evening, a bus driver refused to let an elderly woman ride without fare. Everyone turned away pretending not to notice, except me. I gave her the money thinking nothing of it. Yet that one act of kindness had become the thread connecting every blessing that followed. My mother's life was saved because Jeanette remembered. My dream became real because Benjamin believed. And I learned that family isn't defined by blood or wealth, but by who shows up when you're falling apart. Standing in my studio months later, surrounded by satin lace and the laughter of brides finding themselves in mirrors, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I wasn't haunted by Tyler's silence anymore. The humiliation of that dinner had lost its sting. Instead, I carried gratitude, because if his parents' judgment had not pushed me away, I might never have discovered where I truly belonged. Sometimes the worst pain is just the beginning of a greater healing. Benjamin often reminded me of that. Our bond had grown steady and unforced. There was comfort in the way he believed in me, without condition, the way he treated my mother as though she were his own family. We didn't rush into labels or promises. Instead, we built something rooted in trust one day at a time. And for me, that was more valuable than any grand gesture. One evening as I locked up Cooper Bridal, I stood outside beneath the glow of the streetlight. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the pavement glistening like it had the night I first walked away from Tyler's mansion. But this time, the reflection I saw staring back from the shop window wasn't broken. She wasn't desperate for approval. She was strong. She was whole. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "I am enough." And for the first time, I believed it. That is what I want to leave with you. Heartbreak, rejection, even betrayal, they don't define your ending. They can shape your beginning. My story proves that kindness can ripple back when you least expect it, and that the family you build by choice may matter more than the one you were born into. And if my story has reached you tonight, I hope you'll take the next step. Hit that subscribe button and keep following along, because every story we share here holds a truth. And sometimes the twist waiting at the end can change how you see your own life. Don't miss what comes next. The storm that once broke me had cleared the skies for something far greater. And as I watched my mother laugh with Jeanette in the corner of the shop, Benjamin smiling quietly beside them, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And it all began with a single act of kindness on a rainy bus ride. There's a quiet kind of peace that settles in when storms finally pass. I felt it months later, standing in the doorway of Cooper Bridal, watching sunlight stream across the floorboards. My mother sat near the front, flipping through a magazine healthier than I had seen her in years. Laughter spilled from her lips as Jeanette teased her about learning to sew again. Benjamin leaned casually against the counter, sipping coffee, his smile steady and warm. For the first time, I realized I wasn't holding my breath anymore. Life no longer felt like something I was trying to survive. It felt like something I was living fully, freely. Sometimes I still thought about the girl who had walked into that mansion desperate to be accepted. She had left drenched in rain and humiliation, certain her world had ended. But what she didn't know was that endings often disguise themselves as beginnings. That broken night had been the very thing that led me here to a life built not on someone else's approval, but on love, resilience, and quiet strength. I learned that kindness is never wasted. Even the smallest gesture, like a bus fare on a rainy evening, can ripple back in ways you can't imagine. I learned that heartbreak can be a teacher pushing you toward truths you would never have chosen to face. And I learned that family is not defined by last names or bloodlines, but by the people who refuse to let you stand alone in the storm. So I choose gratitude for the pain that sharpened me, for the strangers who became family, and for the dreams that refused to die. And when I lock up my shop at night, I whisper a quiet promise to keep creating beauty, to keep believing in hope, and to never forget how far I've come. Because the story that once began in the rain now blooms in the light.